So we continue on our analysis of Something from Nothing, Richard Dawkins and Lawrence Krauss. In the last video, we saw that Richard Dawkins stated that he preferred churches to teach Christians that they must reject evolution to be Christians. And he knows that that's not true. And the reason why he wants that is so that he can strawman Christianity and go for atheism. So he wants you to believe that it's either Christianity or evolution, and then he gives you reason for evolution, so you must reject um, Christianity, which is obviously false because you can have both. So here you see that Dawkins actually wants Christians to lie to other Christians, to tell them wrong things, so that then he can strawman their position. I think that's very dishonest. Now let's hear Dawkins' strawman of religion.
I scratched my left ear, and something terrible happened. So maybe I should make sure I don't scratch my left ear again. These are superstitious responses, and when you're living in a world of ignorance, then if you're governed by fear, you could very well make up superstitions. Pigeons do it in Skinner boxes. Skinner himself did a very interesting experiment in which he put pigeons in a Skinner box is a cage in which if the pigeon does something like peck a key, it gets a reward, and pigeons readily learn to do that. Skinner put his pigeons in Skinner boxes where absolutely nothing that the pigeon did had any effect whatever. But nevertheless, at random, rewards were delivered. Okay? Which is sort of like our ancestors' world. And then
so far,
he came
so
back
good.
after a few hours and saw half a dozen pigeons under this regime. One pigeon would be preening under its left wing, another would be turning round in circles, another would be scratching the ground, another would be wiping its head on the ground, and another would be facing into the bottom left-hand corner. Each pigeon had superstitiously done something, accidentally been rewarded, because that's when the mechanism produced the food, and carried on doing it. And so each pigeon became a kind of maniac for doing a particular ritual, which is exactly like one tribe sacrifices a goat in order to make the rains come. Another tribe
Now that's the
gets down on
problem.
its knees and faces Mecca and prays 5 times a day, whatever it is. Each tribe develops its own superstition in order to get rewarded, and of course in order to avoid being punished, in order to avoid the fearful consequences of random events which they had no control over.
I put man here because it's not really just one straw man. There are many straw mans here. Dawkins claims that religious people have their superstitions because they are afraid of punishment. He claimed that, people um, do these things just because they are afraid. That's not true. Many people worship God not because they are afraid of being punished, but because they think it's the right thing to do. And you can say, okay, but in Christianity, if you don't do the right things, you can be punished. Okay, but there are religions, for example, which believe that uh, everyone's well, in Christianity, some people believe that too, that everyone's gonna be saved, for example, and some people even believe that there is no punishment after you die and things like that, and they still do certain things. So it's certainly not just because of punishment. I personally do many things in Christianity, my prayers and stuff like that, not because I'm afraid to be punished, but because I actually like and need to do those things. Now, Dawkins says that it's this thing about the pigeons. It's actually a very interesting experiment because it shows why some people have some superstitions, but it doesn't explain why everyone has some so-called superstitions. For example, he says that the Muslims uh, pray 5 times a day, um, turn to Mecca because of just like he said, exactly by the same reasons that the pigeons do those nonsenses that he described. And that's certainly not true. The reason why the Muslims pray that way is not because they did it once or twice and some nice things started happening. It's because they believe that there was a revelation from God that told them to do so, because Muhammad told them that he had a revelation and they believed in him. It has nothing to do with doing random events and getting random rewards. So Dawkins' analogy is completely wrong, and it's a complete straw man, because that's not why most religious people do what they do. They do what they do because they think that there is a book with some revelation. And now, why does the book have some revelation? Why do they believe that the book is revelation? Well, sometimes it's because they believe that the book contains, for example, the Muslims believe that the Quran is revelation because they believe the Quran has been perfectly preserved and is extremely eloquent. That has absolutely nothing to do with having random rewards by doing random things. And Christians believe, for example, that the Bible is revelation because they think there is nice, let's say, for example, there are many reasons, but one example would be there is good historical evidence for the resurrection of Jesus, for example. That has nothing to do with random rewards. So Dawkins is clearly doing a strawman argument here. I would say the next part is a bit of a funny moment. Listen to this.
This book on self-deception, where he makes the point that actually it is an evolutionary advantage to be optimistic and to believe that you're more intelligent than you really are, better looking than you really are, etc.
Yeah.
So there is real merit in what you say.
Well, that's interesting, isn't it? Uh, its evolution shows you that it's better if you believe you're more intelligent than you really are. That could explain some of Dawkins and Krauss's confidence in what they say.
Let's move on. I guess it's this side, right? Yeah, I mean, this is a follow up to the earlier point, and it's really where I left off with the God delusion,
This
and
is
you
so
talk
bad.
about the origins of religion and how we have amazing creativity and we're able to imagine things that are logically possible but not proven. And
Oh, wait right there. He said that we can think about things that are logically possible and not proven. I presume he means God. Now, I don't know if you know this, but if it is logically possible that God exists, then he exists. And if you are skeptical about this, you can look at the ontological argument. With that said, I don't think that you can establish very well the fact that it's logically possible that God exists. So I don't think the ontological argument is very good, but it's certainly valid. And if you concede that it's logically possible that God exists, then he will exist. So this reader shows a bit of modal ignorance in this claim, because he doesn't believe that God exists.
the point that people do need to believe things that they don't have direct evidence for, and that have, I mean, basically.
Okay, so what's the question?
My question is this: it's a biological question and it's a practical question. If 90% of the people on the planet are turning to religion to get through their lives, how do we? Because for me, it was easy once I watched an episode of Cosmos or read a few lines of Mr. Dawkins' book. It was obvious. I didn't have any more questions. But I have
What? Well, he's saying that he after he watched Cosmos one episode and read Dawkins, it was enough, and he didn't have any more questions. Well, I think that's a typical reader, typical new atheist, that just sees some logically invalid arguments from Dawkins' book, some catchy phrases from some programs, and gets the authority of some physicists, and has deeply incoherent epistemologies, deeply incoherent metaphysics behind positivist ideas from 1 century ago. And then he thinks that he discovered everything, and he claims remarkably that he doesn't have any more questions about God. Whoa, that's interesting, because I'd like to talk to him and see how much he knows about this, because I really doubt that he doesn't have questions. Maybe he doesn't ask the questions, but certainly he does not have the answers for many questions about God. And then he talks. Now let's see what he says next.
a lot of time to spend on this. I'm relatively wealthy compared to most people on the planet. How do we practically get people whose lives are miserable, who are struggling to survive, and who are clinging to life so perilously, to be able to come to a level where they have an understanding, at least basic understanding, of the world we do live in?
I would like to know if he has a basic understanding of the world we live in, because maybe he has a nice scientific understanding, but the philosophical, epistemological, etc. understanding seems to be really bad. And Dawkins and Krauss seems to be really bad understanding too. So uh, I think many Christians actually have a better understanding than this atheist here. I hope so, at least. Let's hear another nice question and even better answer.
Much for both of you for coming. I have a question for Professor Dawkins about the role of the humanities in human affairs. You've spoken with great eloquence and persuasiveness about the value of science, and with equal eloquence and persuasiveness
Great
about the
eloquence and
lack of
persuasive.
value of religion.
Oh my.
Where do you see the humanities?
By humanities, you would mean
literature, history,
study of
philosophy.
history, literature, languages, arts. I mean, immensely valuable. Some of the crowning achievements of the human species lie in the humanities. I see no
I
problem
agree
with that at all.
with that.
I'm proud to be a member of the same species as Shakespeare and Beethoven and Michelangelo. So
Agree?
I have no quarrel with anybody who wants to make a career out of the humanities and who wants to study them. A professor of history, professor of literature. These seem to me to be the right sort of things to be going on in a university and in a culture. I would accept
Now is the problem.
EXCEPT. I would accept theology from that, because theology, it seems to me, unlike those other humanities that you mentioned, is not a subject at all.
Well, that's painfully false. Okay? Uh, Theology is no subject at all. Theology is a subject that studies, even if God does not exist, theology is a subject because it studies the concept of God. It studies the philosophy of the concept of God, and that's certainly a subject. It studies biblical things, like Dawkins would point out. Let's hear what else he has to say. Now people cheer him like typical.
As Jefferson said, a professor of divinity has no place in our university.
And he created a university.
Really. So what is the meaning of democracy and the education of the public education? You have to give people what they want. If most people want to study theology, then you have to give them what they want. And I mean, I don't just mean Christianity. I mean, if I don't believe that Islam is true, but I don't say that Islamic theology is no subject at all. That's absurd. And I don't say that you should not offer people to study Islamic theology in universities. Of course you should. I believe it's false, but of course you should let them study. It's part of what public education means.
Exactly, and I agree with you 100%. I put on a challenge, and maybe some people here can try and match it. I've challenged theologians to give me a single example of a contribution to human knowledge that theology has provided in the last 500 years. And
I'm not a theologian, but I'm gonna answer that. First, they never talk about philosophy, which is rather sad because it's a humanity, and they reject it many times, which is really self-refuting because it's a philosophical statement. Theology with no place in the university. What's the role of the state? I already said that. It's to offer the public what they want, what they need. Theology for human knowledge. Well, here's some contributions for you. The concept of God is certainly knowledge. If you understand the philosophy behind it, that's knowledge. God, if he exists, of course, theology gives you many truths about God or theories about God and basis of knowledge. Theology gives you a framework while you can build your science on. Because if you don't believe in God, then it's much harder to suppose that the world actually has some order. And theology tells you, no, there is a God that created the world, and we believe that if he exists, it's much more probable that the world is ordered. So then you have a motivation to do science and a motivation to do knowledge. And if you believe in free will, as well, then you have a much more rational basis for your beliefs. And I will continue this in the next video.